Hey everybody, I'm Pastor AJ Houseman, and welcome to 10-Foot Pole, a podcast dig deeper into aspects of the Bible that get glossed over or totally ignored in most preaching. The Bible has a lot of parts that are racy, uncomfortable, and sometimes downright horrifying. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 26. Our guest today is Pastor Allison Johnson from Journey and Faith Lutheran Church in Racine, Wisconsin.
Hello, hello.
I said it right that time. I think last year when we did this, Allison's a return guest, by the way. When I did it last year, I was like, Racine?
It depends. If you're from there, you say Racine.
Oh,
but I'm from Oak Creek, and so I just say Racine like a normal Wisconsin person, not like a native. Yeah, Wisconsin.
You are a native Wisconsin.
Yeah,
night.
With my paper bags and yes.
Okay. With your paper bag.
I was just trying to say bag because I know that's the word that gets me. And other people from...
Someone said that yesterday, and it was like, oh, it was talking to my child, and was like, oh, do you need it in your bag? And I was like, oh my God, because we're in Wisconsin. Or we're in Minnesota. It's a bag.
It's a bag.
It's a bag.
And I don't think I say it that bad, but, you know.
You don't, compared to some. This accent was a lot thicker,
I'll just avoid every A.
Yeah.
Every short A sound.
But we are actually, as I just mentioned, we are currently located in the state of Minnesota. Not Wisconsin. I understand. Very offensive.
Yeah, we're different, man.
Both states would be offended by that.
Listen, Minnesota's cool, but they're not the same.
Nope, very different. Agreed. Anyways, we are in Minnesota. An exciting thing about this is, so from here on out, for the entire rest of the season, I will be recording in person with all of my guests.
Whoop.
Yeah, it's really exciting for me. A neat thing about a podcasting ministry is I can do it over the computer, right? So like that's, it's been a super awesome thing to be able to engage folks from all over the country, which is, I don't know, I think pretty great, especially, as we engage, just different backgrounds and stuff like that. And, sort of expose audiences to, really cool voices from everywhere. And it is beautiful and wonderful to be able to have these kind of conversations with people in person. It's sort of a thing of like, I became a pastor because I really like to spend time with people, and I like to, have conversations with people.
You're like a golden retriever.
I am.
So happy, so excitable, so energetic, and so talkative.
My favorite comedian talks about one of her sisters like that, because she's like the total opposite. She's like, my sister is just like a golden retriever coming at you. Just like, hi,
I'm AJ, I'm your friend, be my friend.
I met her once, and I was like, tone it down, AJ, tone it down. Like, remember, like, be cool, because like she doesn't like that.
Chill, man.
If I ever met her again, I'd be like, listen, here's the deal. I am like your sister. I am indeed a golden retriever of a human.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Anyways, so I really enjoy doing these things in person. That's pretty important to me. So it means a lot to me that I get to be in the same physical location as you, doing really cool things like recording this podcast.
Yes, and I haven't seen you in a long time, so this is also great.
Mm-hmm. It's fantastic. So here we are in the state of Minnesota doing some podcasting. Okay, so diving into it, Pastor Allison and I are gonna talk about the Genesis. I love Genesis. I'm very much like I love talking about
Genesis and Revelation. I'll take the two bookends.
Yes! Oh my gosh. So we've been talking about, like, I want to do, like, a special episode on Revelation.
Yes!
So, you know what? Maybe I'll have, like, I'll do, like, a special episode, then I'll have, like, you and maybe a couple other ones, like, a whole panel of people.
I'll nerd out, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'll do research now.
So Revelation is fun. Also doesn't come up very much in the lectionary, so that's,
because we're scared of it.
Yes.
Which we shouldn't be.
Yeah.
It's the best. Love it.
So we'll talk about that. But right now we're going to talk about Genesis, which is my personal favorite. Anyways, so this, we're going to talk about Genesis 1, chapter 1 to chapter 2, verse 4a. For people who are like, A? What the hell? Where is that? I've never seen an A in my Bible. This is how, when we split things up for the lectionary, there are, like, most verses have like two sentences. And so like the first sentence would be A, the second would be B. Or if it's like one long sentence, there's like usually a comma and like the first part of the sentence is
ABC for some of them. If you're the Apostle Paul, probably.
Yeah, it's very talking. Anyways, it's just a way of distinguishing like the first sentence and then the second sentence, and the way the verses were kind of mapped out when they, again, we've talked about this before, those chapter numbers and verse numbers are not, like, that's not a part of the original Greek or Hebrew text. Those are things that we added later in order for us to help find things easier in this giant collection of ancient works, right? And so, they just kind of got, some of them I think got put in there like arbitrarily. And so they don't always, like, sections of scripture kind of fit differently. And so sometimes you'll get this. So like one of these sentences fits with this first creation story here, and then the next sentence, even though it's probably the same verse, is that it's you can laugh.
It's just how we group stuff together. It's just so, because it's all just like, what do we think makes sense to us in this moment as we're putting this lectionary together?
Yeah, it's all totally arbitrary.
Yeah.
Anyways, so that's why it's to 2A. So this is the first lesson for Sunday, June 4th.
Yeah.
Which is Holy Trinity Sunday.
Yikes.
For those that intend on going to church, specifically a church that follows the church calendar year. Do you want to tell us about Holy Trinity Sunday? Because you're like excited about it. You're like,
oh, not about Holy Trinity Sunday. Oh. That's if you want to be a heretic and try to preach the Trinity. But that's not my jam.
Why does it make you a heretic to preach the Trinity?
Because it's hard. How do you explain the Trinity?
Oh, yeah.
It's just, right, like everyone tries to make it make sense. And the Trinity, I think what's cool about it is it doesn't really make logical sense. And I think that's what makes God interesting and cool and sort of awesome, is because God is so different from who we are. Right, so I'm not even going to try to explain the Trinity and turn into a heretic, but so these texts were created or picked probably because some of them reference God being more than just like God the Father, God the Parent, or just like it's beyond. So
yes, which is true in the Genesis creation story that we're going to talk about. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well then, let's dive into it. It's a lot of words. Do you have it in front of me that you would want to read some with me?
I can find it.
If the answer to that is no,
it's no.
Fine, I can read it. Okay, I'll just read it. All right. When God began to create the heavens... Oh, I am reading from the New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition.
Ooh.
Yeah, I try to be updated.
I like it.
Okay. When God began to create the heavens and the earth was complete chaos, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness God called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day. And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And so it was so. And God called the dome sky. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the sky be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together God called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seeds and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seeds in it." And it was so. And the earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seeds of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night. And let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. And let them be lights, let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. God set them in the dome of the skies to give light upon the earth, to rule over day and over the night, to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky. So God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves of every kind, with which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters of the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle and creeping things, and wild animals of the earth of every kind. And it was so. God made the wild animals of the earth of every kind, and the cattle of every kind, and everything that creeps upon the ground of every kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make humans in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created humans in their image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. God said, see, I have given you every plant yielding seeds that is upon the face of all earth, and every tree with seeds in its fruits. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the sixth day God finished the work that God had done, and rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that God had done in creation. These are the generations of heavens and the earth when they were created.
The word of the Lord.
The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. A long one.
It is a really long reading.
So this is what we call the first creation story. And I say that because there is a second creation story that starts at chapter 2, verse 4b.
Yep.
This very next, and a lot of Bibles that have the different, that have kind of the titles above the section actually starts right there, and it says, another count of creation.
Right. And I feel like we miss that quite a bit. Right? Like, it's like, oh, the creation story, and you're like, which one? And then it's like, what happens?
I say that, and people are like, what do you mean?
Well, and then you could talk about, right, at post-flood, that's in a sense a new creation story too, right? So there's a lot of interesting...
Well, there's also, going back to like why there's two creation stories, there's also two flood stories.
Yeah, that's a whole nother thing.
Because it's put together.
That's complete nerdery.
Yeah, it's so for those that are like, what do you mean there's two creation stories? I don't understand. When I went to Sunday school, no one ever told me there was two different creation stories. So there's this theory is not quite the word. So scholars, and especially those that have studied the manuscripts and stuff like that, so they can parse out the different authors to Genesis. So like when Genesis was put together, it was a compilation of different teachings, basically from different tribes, right? So like part of it would have came from like part of Israel, another part from a different part, right? Like, so they had their own stories and their own versions of this sort of primordial account. And so I say this, so the primordial account, so this is, the way I explain it if I teach an Old Testament class, is the book of Genesis is like the superhero origin story.
I like that.
Yeah.
So I didn't think about that. That's cool.
Well, it's big right now, right? Like Marvel's doing everyone's origin stories and have been for a few years, right?
That's
like
true.
These are the origin stories of all the superheroes that have been in the comic books, blah, 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 for years. And so the Israelites for the Hebrew Bible they're the heroes, right? This is their book. And we've talked about this before, that there are different, we have this sort of origin, and then it spreads out that we have these different tribes that, like, they do have the same God. They that they would fall into this wider category of, in modern day, what we say is sort of Judaism. In starting with this Hebrew faith kind of thing, they all had families, right? If there were a few sons, right, some moved away, they were now a different tribe, but they still had the same God, and they still believed the same things. And so then these different tribes, right, like, they would have wrote down different stories. So primarily the Hebrew Bible, so for Christianity, our Old Testament, it follows a particular group of people, a particular tribe, the Israelites. Israel, that comes from Judah, right? Judaism, right? Like, this is very, Israel is Jacob, and he has all of his sons, and then we follow specifically Judah and Judaism, right? Like, it's very specific, the lineage that we're following, and so that's what the Hebrew scriptures follow. So it makes them the heroes. They are the center of attention, right? So you have these other tribes, Jacob had many sons, here are the, whatever. Isaac had many sons, not Isaac. Abraham had many sons.
Father Abraham?
Yep.
Had many sons?
Many sons.
And many sons had Father Abraham?
We only ever talk about one, but yes.
I know.
But because this is the lineage that this story follows. So if we remember that the Hebrew Bible is about this specific people, and it's this specific people telling their origin story. So this history in Genesis, scholars, we call the primordial history. So this primordial history is a way of back explaining. So it doesn't mean it was written first. It was actually written quite later. But a way that they compiled their stories that they would tell to children, to answer the big life questions. Where did we come from? How did, this is how God created.
Who are we?
Who are
What's
we?
our purpose?
What's our purpose?
Why are
exactly.
we here? All
so
that
that's
fun
what
stuff.
these were written later to explain those things, right? Like, these are how they told the stories. And so eventually they got written down. And so they were written down in a few different places. So they've identified 4 different sources. So to the Torah, we call the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, which is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, that they have identified 4 different authors. And then at some point, gosh dang it, Siri, leave it alone. That they found 4 different authors, and then eventually they all got compiled together to make this Torah, this total, kind of mash of things. And so the way that things got mashed together, some stories overlap, right? And so there's some that, like, they went with this version of it, and some they went with this version. And there's some where they included multiple versions of the same
like
story.
The flood, where you have 7 pairs of animals and 2 at the same time, and you're like, this doesn't make sense.
Yep.
But it does if you're like, oh, this person wrote, or this group wrote this, and that group wrote that, and instead of having them separately, let's just smush them together and see what happens.
Yes.
Ergo, the flood story.
Yes. So with Genesis, with the creation story, this is all in Genesis. With the creation story, there's, the first account to creation, and then back to back is the second account to creation. The flood story, so when we talk about, like, Noah's Ark and all the cute animals and stuff, those are actually, like, piled on top of each other. It's like every other paragraph is a different. So it actually sounds really repetitive, where you read, Noah and his family build this boat, and then the next paragraph. So God commands Noah and his family to build this boat. And you're like, wait a minute, is there an echo in the room? Like, that's how it's put together. And then it says, and God commanded them to take 2 of every kind of animal, the next paragraph. God commanded them to take 7 of every kind of animal.
What?
And you're like, what? So if you read it, it's piled back to back. And so that one's harder the way that they compiled that story, which it
makes no sense.
Yeah, why did they do that? That's the thing that has always bothered me about that. That's why whenever we talk about the Noah's flood story, about the deluge, whenever we talk about the flood story in church, typically you'll get, like, this really random grouping of verses, and you're like, wow, why did they? Because they're trying to make like a succinct story out of it. Because if you were to just, like, read the whole chapter, you're like, what?
Well, and it spans 3 chapters, and it's just like, it's pieced together, but then it's also 3 chapters long, and you have, like, 2 different endings, because you have, like, the blessing.
There is 2 different endings.
Yeah, and it's just, it's very confusing. But that's,
that could be a fun conversation.
Yeah, Wait,
did we talk about that? I might have talked about that on
Does it show up in the lectionary? I should know this, but I don't.
Part of it does, I think, and so I think there was some episode in the first season. I think maybe that we
shows up in the Easter Vigil. If you ever do like a vigil thing,
yes,
you can have 12 episodes for one.
Well, oh my gosh,
That's a lot.
Yeah, you could have a lot of fun stuff on the Easter Vigil because there's a lot of parts of a lot of passages.
There's so many good things
in the Easter Vigil.
Oh, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the furnace, and how funny it is, and people are walking. Crazy.
Someone's like dropping stuff in the hotel room above us or jumping on their bed.
Or they're annoyed because we're talking.
Yeah, they're like, oh, those women downstairs talking about the Bible.
How dare they?
How dare they? The vigil's fun, and I think is like a lot of churches. Many churches don't do vigils anymore, right? And so like it's because who's going to church on, a Saturday night?
We have Saturday service, so now we do the vigil because I'm gonna do the vigil if we're gonna do a Saturday. Because I'm not doing Easter Sunday on Saturday.
No, I love it.
It's fun.
I started to do like an abbreviated kind of vigil thing with like the sunrise service. Like if you go to the sunrise service, you're gonna get it, at least if I wrote it, if you're going to my sunrise service at my church, which is nowhere right now, but I like to do like an abbreviated vigil and then with like the lighting of the fire and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. To also break up the sunrise service from the other two services.
Yep.
Anyways, and because you're generally outside, you should have a fire. It's fun. Okay.
We got so off topic.
Yeah, it happens all the time. Anyways, all these accounts to these different authors to this primordial history. So this is the origin story to the Israelite people. So when they were doing their instruction with children in their temples and synagogues, what they would, kids would ask these questions. These were the ways that they would explain that to them. Why is the earth the way it is? So here's our story of how God created the heavens and the earth and the animals and all those things. Now, I say that also for you to understand, in case you didn't, this is not a literal accounting. We talk about no one that listens to this podcast should be like, we don't, biblical literalism.
No, we don't do that here.
It's actually just stupid. Like, it is not. I hate saying that, but like, it's really like.
Well, especially because so much of it, like,
it
you can't hold all of it literally because it doesn't make sense.
Because it contradicts itself. Anyways, right. That's not even the point. The whole point of like, it is not a faithful way to read the Bible because most of the Bible is different genres, right? Like, it is not a history story.
It's literature.
It's literature.
It's stories.
Much of the Bible is stories and literature. Or for the New Testament, it's letters, right? Like,
we're reading someone's mail, which is weird and
you
funny.
Are reading. That's what all the epistles are. You're reading someone's mail. And so, like, if you don't know who wrote the letter, who they're talking to, who's the letter addressed to, and what was going on at the time, like, if you leave all of that shit out and just decide, well, because Paul said here in this very specific place that this is the rule of blah, 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 it doesn't.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah.
It's just, like, I really do, like, I think it's such an abuse to the text that's there because you have to understand the type of literature that you're reading.
Well, and all faith is contextual, like, faith is not stagnant. Like, it changes and grows, and God changes and grows as we change and grow. And, like, God's hanging out with us. And, like, God is not the same and in the same relationship as God was 5,000 years ago with people, with humanity, with the world. Like, God grows with us and changes. And so the things that were happening back, pick a time period, it's just not the same. And so if God were to remain the same, God would no longer be relevant. In my opinion. Because if God is just like hanging out in the pick a time period, I don't know, right? It's just not the same. And we can't just continue to assume God is going to just be stagnant. And
Well, you're actually naming that is so one of the criticisms of Christianity, right, is this idea that like that God created things and then left, that there was some divine creator and left, right, that there's no God that's present in how things run and exist today. And I think, like, sure, if you were to take things, like, very literally and, like, it would feel that way. It would, right? Like, if you're expecting God to interact with the world today the same way that God interacted with the world 2,000, 5,000 years ago, yeah, sure, it's not the same. And so then you have to take that into consideration and how you look at it.
Right.
Anyways, so this Genesis creation story. So this is literature, and actually, it's very sing-songy in the Hebrew itself. So like this very beginning where we have like that God, the creator of the earth was complete chaos, and the darkness covered the face of the deep. So this is, and God swept over the face of the water. Right. So this what God is creating here. It's
Tohu vavohu. Where's Dr. Shram?
Tohu vavohu.
Tohu
you get this
vavohu.
language here.
Oh,
Of
it's so
this
pretty.
sing-songy thing, right? The creating out of nothing, right? This formless void thing that we hear in English. It's not quite as it's the whole thing is like it's literature. It's meant to rhyme. It's meant to be.
It's beautiful.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and our English translations just don't do it justice because of like the rhyming patterns and like the
and
it's just hard.
I mean, that's a translation thing anywhere. Like anytime I think you translate something from one language to another, you lose some of those things in translation always. Like even if you've listened to, especially I think so the Latin-based languages, like the French and Spanish, like if you listen to it and then you try to translate that to English too, like it's such a beautiful language, then you're like
English ruins
so
everything.
Clunky, such a clunky language. I think it can go back and forth though. Like people have written beautiful things in English. Obviously, we have our own poetry. And
That's true. That's fair.
And so I think you translate those other languages, you get the same problem, right? And so like when we do that, when we take this Hebrew and we translate it away, we lose that piece of it. I think that this beautiful literature piece, for a good translation where this has been attempted to keep it together like this, is Robert Alter's Hebrew Bible, which does come with its own commentary. He is a Jewish Hebrew scholar and translated the entire Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament,
which is bananas.
Is crazy. Himself, with his notes, of course, that he published, that attempts to keep these things in Hebrew that are often lost. So his version of this beginning story does keep some more of that storytelling, this poetic language to it, that you would find in the original Hebrew. I meant to, because I have the complete copy, which was a beautiful ordination gift.
That's a great gift.
By my friend, Pastor Rebecca Boardman, who was a guest on the podcast a couple weeks ago, actually. Ordination gift. I had this complete set, and I meant to like take a picture of that before I left so that I had it for my notes, and I forgot, and I'm many states away now, so I
have his translation of the Psalter. So
he did that first.
Altar Psalter.
The Altar Psalter.
That's what right. I have. So when we have to read that for like, I think Ash Wednesday, you get, is it 51?
Yeah,
Psalm 51. I like to
51.
use that version. And anytime we get to read the Psalm where it's like a central, I like using that because it's right. It's more poetic and has more of the same rhythm, because I think we lose that too because there's a rhythm to it.
Yep. Same. I had that first, obviously, because I took the Psalms class with Dr. Schramm.
Whoop, whoop.
And then got the complete set for ordination because, like, it's beautiful. And to have his notes in there and to really understand why he chose to use certain words, that it makes a difference in how you read it. Because, again, so any English translation you see is translated. Just that, right? So someone had to make a word choice. And, you have a lot of words that are easy to do a one-for-one, but there are some words that, like, don't. Like, they're similar. They could mean this, depending on how you interpret it, right? And so, like, someone had to make those choices when putting it in English.
So can we talk about something specific then?
Let's do it.
Okay,
What do you want to talk about first?
I want to talk about the tohu vavohu. Because that makes it...
It does.
This kind of leads right into what you're saying, leads right into this. So... Verse 2 says, "The earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters." So the formless void is the tohu vavohu. And one, I love preaching. I mean, there's just so many good things to like preach about and like pick apart in this. But like what I think is cool about this is we often think God created out of absolutely nothing and just snapped God's divine fingers and like poof. But that's not it, because there was this formless void. in this darkness, this chaos. And so, right, this formless void can be translated as confusion, emptiness, waste and empty. I saw someone talked about it as this waste and empty and this void. And it's just, it's different because it's not nothing.
Yes.
Because a void is still something. It's a void. And so if God's creating out of this chaos with, someone called it, I think, it's Professor Catherine Schifferdecker. She's at Luther Seminary. I like her stuff. She's a good writer. She called it wild and waste.
Yeah.
And I think that's cool because God is doing something that's God's creating out of something that feels chaotic. Like, yes. I think when I feel chaotic, I try to be calm or order it or whatever. And you could go into, I feel like it's like a white person American thing to everything needs to be in order. And that's how my brain is. But there's something beautiful about God giving things a purpose.
I think so. The way I like to think about it too is, get real circle of lifey over here, but sort of like, compost or recycling.
Yeah, that's where wild and waste makes, I think, a good, that'd be a good, eco translation.
Yes, for very good eco theology of sort of compost, right? That you are taking waste and through it, you're creating something new.
Yeah.
And creating life.
And that's right. And that's, to me, that's the creation story. It's God is taking this void, this waste, this confusion. I like that too. And is creating a space for life where life can flourish, where there's a purpose, where that life has a role. And I think that's really, really cool. When what I like to do for this, it doesn't work out great because I'm not very crafty, but it's just like having a chunk of Play-Doh that's just a blob, and you're creating. Yeah. To me, that's the perfect description. Yes. That's your children's sermon. That's what I always try to do. But it's fun because that's what it is.
You could do that with so many things, right? I think about music, right? So someone took noise and ordered it, assigned different tones value.
That's a great analogy.
And then put it together in a way that it flows beautifully.
Well, it has a purpose and a reason. I like it. Oh, I didn't even think about that with music.
Yeah.
That's great.
Anyways, this is how I envision of creation. I do mostly do the compost, but I'm a really eco-theology kind of person. But I like the music too. But so this is the language that we get here, which, again, with the thing with music or even with Play-Doh, the fact that it is meant to be a creative story, that God is in the midst of, I think it's written in such a beautiful way that this poetry is meant to be art, that the way God creates is art.
And I think I think what's easy to get lost is when we're reading scripture or thinking about what are we going to preach about or what's going on here or what are we trying to learn is, what does this tell us about God? What does this tell us about us as God's people? And to me, right. I have to, because if God's not doing something, then we've made it about us.
God, that creation itself is art, and it is beautiful. And as we hear over and over again, it is good. It is wonderfully made. That includes humans. That includes the plants, the animals. I like the language of the monsters.
Sea monsters! Yes. I think it's great, because it's just what?
But also the creeping things, bugs.
Yes.
The
creepy things.
I'm I don't like to kill bugs because I feel like
I'm a bug killer.
I do.
I'm sorry.
We pay for an exterminator. It's it is what it is. But what it always reminds me of Lilo and Stitch. Do you know the thing about the mosquitoes in Lilo and Stitch?
Mm-mm.
Well, they always talk about whatever, it's this planet is, the entire purpose of this planet is to breed mosquitoes for some other thing. Right? And so they come to check on they're oh, how are they doing? Or another good one is to think about one of Ellen DeGeneres' early bits about talking to God. Do you know that one?
No, enlighten me.
This is actually one of the bits that this is what actually really got her well known. This one really took off. Is so she says, she's I wonder if you just call up God and ask a question. If I called up God, you get the angels as sort of the live angelic choir is the waiting room music, and then you talk to God and you're yeah, just curious, what's the point of fleas, right? Why create them? They're nothing, whatever. And this is her talking to God, because you don't get to hear God say, sorry. No, I didn't realize how many people were employed by the flea collar industry. Just to get that there is a purpose to even the tiniest bits of this creation. But also to go, this relates directly to when we talk about, which we've talked about many times on the podcast, John 3:16 and 17, that God loved the world, it's cosmos, the entire
whole
world,
yeah,
that God indeed sent Jesus to save the world. It's not save us, it's not save humans, it is the cosmos.
Well, and to talk about our other favorite book in Revelation, right? It's like another garden experience. It's another, like, it's a creation experience.
That's Genesis 2, though.
Oh man, wrong one. Oops.
You can still talk about it.
Thank you. But it's just right, because it's just right.
The garden
with the river
only
flowing
exists in
through
the Genesis 2 creation story.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
That's also where you get the creation. I will talk here, though. This is a good segue to talk about the creation of humans. So there are two creation of humans. There's the creation of humans in the first creation story and the creation of humans in the second story. I think this is the hardest part, that people don't understand that these are two totally different places in the Bible and two totally different stories. Because, so in the first, I love the creation. So when people try to use this language that, like, males are superior because God created men first,
that's
and then
in the
women,
other one.
that actually only exists in one creation story. In Genesis 1, the first creation story, God creates them together at the same time. It's not distinguished. God creates humans. He created them male and female. Right? Like, that's the language that we're given. It's still binary. But
yeah, and I'm gonna continue, and then I'm going to go on my soapbox.
Well, I'm going to let you go on your soapbox, but it's at one time, because I'm going to do a different soapbox really quick. We talked about this recently in our episode with Pastor Colleen when we were talking about pronouns for God and where do we hear them and what do we hear, and quite often we did speak that we mostly have the male pronouns. Again, it's how language is written. It's very old text.
Because all boys wrote it. It's called patriarchy.
Yeah.
Burn it down.
Yep, that's... Quite
sorry.
Awesome. Yep. No,
it is.
It's fine. I know. That we give males that status.
Oh, we didn't give it to them. They took it. Sorry. I care about this.
I know. Well, but to say, so this is one place in here where God speaks about themselves in the plural.
Yeah.
That God, so this is why I said that for me, to most often, it feels authentic to me in my description of the first person of the Trinity, the Creator God, is to use they, them pronouns. Because the very first time that God speaks about themselves,
us and our,
they use that about themselves. So that's that, let us make image in our. Let us make humans in our image.
Can I say a fun story about this?
Do it.
So when something came up in one of my Bible studies with my people at church, and we were talking about language for God, and one of my people who's 79, she was like, yeah, it makes sense that, like, why would we not use they for God? It makes the most sense, because if we are, like, if it's Trinitarian, Father, Son, and Spirit, it's talking about one entity.
If we talk about one as God, it's yeah.
And I was just like, if you can get it, anybody can get it, right? Like, it's not that hard to think about it, and especially it's Holy Trinity Sunday. If you're feeling brave, like, maybe this is the Sunday to be like...
This is the Sunday. If you're a pastor that's listening, that you could change your whole service away from all of the he's and see what happens.
Yeah. I like it.
If you've gone to churches that I've served at, I just automatically do that a lot of the time anyways.
I do it when I read it, because it's a lot of, it's just a lot of he language, and I can't.
Well, I did also recently on the podcast apologize, because there was one that, like, the way it was written out, if I would have just said them, or if I would have said God, you wouldn't have made sense. I had to use the he in order to distinguish God, which is...
We'll forgive you.
I know. I could have also used she and said, listen, today we're using she, her pronouns for God, and I didn't. I could have done that as well.
Yeah.
It was a lazy Sunday, too, I think. As I read directly from Sundays and Seasons. Anyways, tell me about, let's talk about the binary.
Yeah.
First to just say, that's how it's described in Genesis 1.
Yeah.
It isn't until the Genesis 2 creation story that that we get the first human, the Adam, which by the way is not a formal name.
No.
I think I've said this. The Adam comes from the Adamah, which is the earth, the dirt, the stuff, and so the Adam is just the dirtling, the earthling.
Yeah, it's
being
basically like
created out of.
It's
dirt.
like an androgynous dirt earth creature, and Adamah.
It's not gendered. This is also the first human does in the second creation story where we hear this Adam and Eve language. The Adam, again, not a formal name. It means earthling or dirtling.
I like it.
Is non-gender. It is an androgynous creature. It doesn't have a particular male or female gender. That is not assigned until God decides to create a second human that is different from the first human.
Yeah.
Not inferior, not whatever, as a companion that is different. So God created them companions, did not create them inferior, superior, just different.
Well, yeah, and so I have a soapbox for this too, so I'm going to hop on this.
Let's hit
I'm going to jump up.
Let's go
so
for it.
Two things about that in that second creation story is one, the words for male and female switch when it's out of, because you have like the whole rib thing. It's Adam and Adamah, right? Yeah, we're not going to talk about that. You'd have to change it to explicit content. But yeah, so it starts with Adam and Adamah. So you have the earth and you have the earth creature. So the earth is Adamah and the earth creature is Adam. But then it switches to, I think it's Ish and Isha.
It does. Yes.
I remembered. But, where was I going with this? Because I think, right, you alluded to this earlier that...
That's where the English of Eve comes from is the Ish. That's why.
Yes.
Because it comes out of the other earthling. The Ish comes out of
like
Isha.
Man and woman, whoa, duh.
Yes.
Right? So a lot of language stuff.
Yeah.
But you talked about how men were created first and therefore they're better. So my soapbox on this part, I have a lot of soapboxes.
Let's hit
If
them.
I was at church, I'd start standing
Go
up
for
and
it,
pacing.
Pastor.
Yeah.
Preach.
Yeah. So we often think, God needed a little helpmate to Adam, the boy, needed a little helper to make him complete. And that's where you get a lot of complementarism thing where boys are this, girls are this, and they fit together, which is messed up and problematic in a lot of ways.
Yes.
And because we're focusing so much on the difference. But I think it was my friend Juniper.
First of all, God created animals as the helper. Again, in the second
and God
creation
calls God's
story.
self a helper.
Yes.
But
that's the second story, right?
Yeah.
In the first Genesis story, humans were created last. All that shit was already done.
Yeah.
In the second Genesis story, God created the Adam, the dirtling, and then created all the animals because the Adam needed help because, we need help, right? We all do. We can't do things by ourselves, blah, 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 blah. And then finally decides there should be more than one.
Well, and the Adam, the boy, whatever, God's like, hey, you need a helper, you need a companion. And we always the female's different. But the thing is, it's a person.
Yeah.
Adam there's a sameness in it, another
exactly.
human.
Right.
Animals didn't make listen, I love my dog.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between having an animal companion and a person companion. And I think that's what we forget about is that it's about the sameness is the importance, not the difference.
That is the important.
It's the sameness, but we're in the wrong Genesis story. It's just such a good book.
It is.
Okay, go back to my binary thing.
This is what I was saying. I could talk about Genesis every day. I taught, when I did teach Old Testament class, we spent more time with Genesis than we should.
It's the best.
All this, we're going to briefly touch these books, but let's talk about Genesis.
Yeah.
This is really...
We did a
Well, it's also why I think we're a lot of harmful theology comes out of Genesis.
Yes.
Because of, again, we talk about biblical literacy, being literal, that kind of bullshit. A lot of it can be mistaken out of here. It also, when it gets when you superimpose modern theological ideas onto the ancient texts, if you're reading Jesus in this, you're not reading it correctly. Jesus has nothing to do with Genesis, right? And so that kind of stuff that we do,
right?
That really Anyways, I could spend all day. Tell me about your other soapbox.
Yeah, so my other soapbox has to go back to when you brought up the binary, because this is often, and I think this gets quoted, I believe, in Matthew and used in a lot of wedding texts. God created male and female in God's image. God created them, blah, 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 right? And so it can be used to talk about, there's a boy and there's a girl, and they go together, and there are two genders. And I think, especially this feels pertinent because trans people, non-binary people are getting attacked in our country, and I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about that, but
you can definitely
that's important to me, and this is justice, and this is our faith affirming trans and non-binary people and saying, no, you are made in God's image. So I'm just going to straight up read my notes for this.
Read it.
Because this is important to me.
Yeah.
And gender as a binary, I think,
you're right.
is
I think this is
stupid.
very important to talk about right now.
So my friend Juniper, who is dope, taught me and my church people, they gave us a little presentation, basically an LGBTQ 101. And one of the things we did spend a lot of time talking about was gender. And there's this poetic device called a merism. I haven't heard of it until Juniper taught me, but I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
No.
Well, now you're going to learn too.
Tell me about it, yeah.
So you can thank Juniper later. So a merism is a poetic device where you name specific elements that encompass a whole. So basically, when you say, when I sit and when I rise, there's middle spaces. So when God created the heavens and the earth, it's not just you have a heaven and an earth, you have everything and anything in between.
Love that.
When we call God the Alpha and the Omega, those are the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet.
Because everything's
in between. So it encapsulates all of what's being in between. So like in Genesis 1, we have the heavens and the earth. You have day and night, but we know that dusk and dawn exist.
Right.
Those, we know it, we see it with our eyes, and we celebrate it, and it's beautiful. We have waters in the dry land, but you have swamps and marshes and these in-between spaces. And so why is this not how we view gender?
Humans.
Male and female, gender is this big, beautiful, diverse spectrum of awesomeness of what it means to be made in God's image. And so male and female is a merism as well, right? Humanity as a whole, which means gender as a whole, is made in God's image, right? So rather than we just thinking, no, this is what it means to be male and female, there are only two genders. No, all of gender is reflected in the image of God, and all genders reflect God's image back to us. So my friend Juniper, I'm going to quote them. They said, it does not imply gender is a static binary, but gender is a whole spectrum of possibility that allows humanity to reflect God's image in a diverse way. Just as dusk and dawn are neither simply day or night, but something in between and on its own. Yeah. And so people aren't just, like, well, gender isn't just two things. It's just, the world is not binary.
That is a beautiful, thank you for sharing that with me and with the audience. Like, that's the way, that's going to help me a lot to kind of preach about gender and talk about gender a lot, because that makes total sense, especially based on, again, if we're talking about the literature and about how this portion of the Bible is written, and that's incredible. I love that. The heaven and the earth in between. I think the biggest one to me is when we, the name of that, we say the Alpha and the Omega. Everyone knows we mean, Alpha to Omega. It's the everything. Right. That it's the beginning and the end and all the in between. That's beautiful. I'm going to do two things right now. One, because in case somebody missed all of my other plugs for this book, everyone, please go read Walking the Bridgeless Canyon by Kathy Baldock.
This is your soapbox. Ooh, I have an article plug too.
No, but I want to say this. The reason why is because Kathy does a great job of walking through the historical, psychological, biological aspects of being LGBT and like how important that is, because and when and how LGBT people were targeted, even though it is not related to psychology or biology, but purely because of a political thing that, how do you win at politics? You tell people what to be afraid of and who to blame. That is when and how LGBT people became targeted, because we could no longer blame black people. Yeah. So we needed someone else to be scared of and someone else to blame.
Now we're blaming trans people and
so,
drag queens.
The conservative right have really kind of lost on, same-sex marriage and stuff like that. They've moved on. So now we have to target trans people. That is the new people that you are to fear and who to blame and blah, 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 and all of that fear-mongering politics. Yep. That's what that is. But what's helpful, I think, in that every Christian needs to do the work to learn and talk about and have these conversations and to really dive into this Genesis text and to talk about that, to understand creation, to understand biology, who and how humans are created, because humans are not created binary.
Listen.
Not even a little bit. If you talk to, if you know anything about
go talk to a biologist or a neuroscientist. I learned this, so I was a neuroscience major. This is me being like, I'm a nerd plug, the class that most blew my mind was my sex and gender class, because it was like, the world is not binary. No. People who are queer are created biologically. We exist. And
God created humans, all of the humans in our image, that we are all created and that we are said to be very good. If you believe that God created all people, how is it that do you believe God created people wrong? That God made mistakes? Challenge that against the rest of your theology then.
Yeah.
So that's the Christian version. Anyways, but like from the biological standpoint, this is again, so I say like do the work, read. To talk about this, that like it's not that way.
Yeah. To me, it's like one of the things that stands out, and you touched on this, is just like the world is not binary, which means people are not binary. And when we celebrate all humanity and you could say all the created world is good, tov, great Greek word or great Hebrew word, but like, if all humanity is in God's image and all humanity is good and blessed by God.
That is what Genesis 1 says.
It says it in the Bible.
Right there.
Then that means non-binary people are good. Trans people are good and holy and made in God's image and they help us see God's image in the world better.
Just so everybody knows, Pastor Allison is the newest member of the Reconciling Works Board, which is...
Yes. I actually have 2 plugs. Am I allowed to?
You can give your plugs, and then you have to tell us about this article you're plugging too.
Yeah, so that's one of them. So one of the plugs is this cool article. Again, my friend Juniper sent this to me, and this is informative for them and help them learn. It's from the Christian Century. It's by Austin Hartke, who has a great book.
Yeah, he does.
But it's called Non-Binary Gender and the Diverse Beauty of Creation in the Christian Century. It's great, and it talks about that it talks about those in-between spaces. And so Juniper sent it to me, and I was like, great, I'll plug that because it's a great article. But my other thing is just like a quick understanding scripture. Reconciling Works,
yes,
not a sponsor, has a really great little book that's in my backpack that's not near me. It's right by you, but it's I think it's called Reconciling Scripture, and I think Austin Hartke is one of the authors on that, and Emmy Kegler. But they go through some of these passages and help sort of debunk in a pretty basic way, but some of the clobber passages for queer people. Yeah. So that's my plug.
I love your plug. And yes, and I believe Reconciling Works will send you those books for free if you ask for them.
Yeah.
That is a part of the ministry. We want everyone to have the information. Not because that, like, to try to drive a particular agenda, but to try to learn, and I think more importantly, unlearn some really harmful things that have been become, at some point in time, very mainstream, just because, again, who do we blame now? Yeah.
And that's just, it's not cool. And I want to say it's not Christian, but it's just, I don't know. To me, it's not scriptural. Like, if everyone's in God's image, even the people that, like, I don't like, right? That helps me see people's humanity. And this humanizes people. And it's harder to hate people if we know that they're human, right? And so it's easy to dehumanize, right? So you fearmonger and you create people as these others, and then you can just say, yeah, they don't matter, they're not worth anything. But when we're like, oh, but these people are important to God, that changes things.
It does.
And it should kind of slap us in the face and say, oh yeah, they're beloved.
Like, that's, our part of our calling. Fast forward to, we are Christians, right? So we do subscribe to the words and the language and the life of Jesus and his teachings on behalf of the Creator God. And so he says, I need you to do 2 things. I need you to love God and love each other. Take care of your neighbors. Okay. I didn't hear it. Does your Bible have any asterisks of, like, who's not included in that? No. Mine doesn't either. How strange.
Yeah, that all these exceptions we've added as humans, and which it's honestly, it sucks because we continue to try to limit God and use scripture as a way to limit God, and rather than being like, why would God want to make things smaller and be more exclusive when everything we see in God is more expansive and a bigger embrace and more loving and
which is, this is why, I really love the Genesis 1 story is, I love the poetic language of it, but I really like that, like, God created the sea monsters and said it's good. God created the bugs and said it's good. God created all of these humans in our image and said, it's good. And so to me, it's, I don't know, it's really hopeful. Like when I think of the world, and I know that like if you turn on your television,
I'll say I'm not an optimistic person, and you have the wrong audience over here.
But when I read it and I hear that like it's good, that God created these things and they are good, that they are, God created all the things and all the things are inherently good.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it makes the world feel just a little less scary.
I think there's, like, based on that, I have, like, two big things that, like, are important to me and that you're kind of alluding to is, like, all the, like, the first blessing is not given to people, which I think is awesome, right? It's given to the sea creatures and the birds. And so, to me, there's just so many beautiful things about this passage that creation is good. The creepy crawly things that I hate and that I kill, are good. That stupid centipede that I killed the other day, it was massive. That's good, right? And the trees are good. Plants and flowers are good. The hyenas are good. The red pandas, which are the best animals in the whole world, are good. Birds are good. And so, like, if all of those things are good, what does it mean to treat them that way and to see the created world as sacred? Like, I think that's important. So that's my one thing.
Why this is a very important part of Scripture for the eco-theologists.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. Like, it is, because that's our calling, is to care for this world and to respect it. And if God says it's good, why do we treat it not good?
So that brings us to this other language. So people would argue, well, it says have dominion over them and subdue them. So let's talk about this in two, that this is not a great direct translation. A better one would be to oversee. Would be a better translation.
To steward.
And I see it, because steward's not even the best.
I know.
The reason I like to use the direct translation, that I think the best translation, at least in my understanding, is to oversee. Because, so think about if you are a manager, you are overseeing production, you're overseeing whatever. Your job is to make sure that it's cared for, right? It's not just, like, there's a difference to me between being a ruler and being somebody that oversees. I don't know, what's the best?
A supervisor?
A supervisor, yeah.
A manager.
Or a manager, right? Like, if you're managing something, like, you have to care for the well-being of that thing, right? You're a poor manager if all your produce dies, if you're, or if your production equipment falls apart. You have to take care of it. Like, so to me, like, if our job, not that I do actually believe that it is an incredibly anthropocentric view to think that
it's all about us.
We are the managers of the whole universe. I don't necessarily agree with that particular mindset, but if you do and you read that in Genesis 1 that this is our job, okay. If this is our job, how are we managing creation?
Not well.
Not well at all.
Yeah.
If what we're causing, like, again, we're in Minnesota right now, and like Canada's on fire.
And it was foggy and smoky yesterday.
And it's smoky in Minnesota.
I think there's an air quality alert.
Yes, there is. It was worse than it is today.
It was bad. Yeah.
So like, it's what are we? We're not doing great things as the managers of God's creation.
Well, I'm just thinking about, my spouse,
again, eco-theology.
Yes, I'm gonna go with this a little bit. My spouse loves animals and is like obsessed with animals and has a whole sleeve of endangered animals on her arm, and like, why do we have endangered animals? Right, go to the zoo and read all the little signs, and they tell you this species is in good condition, critical, endangered, it's about to be extinct, right? Why? And it's usually because of people, right? And so what does it mean to create a space to go back to the beginning, to take the confusion and the chaos where all life can flourish?
Yeah.
What does it mean that that's God's desire and purpose? And how are we called to be a part of that, where all life can flourish, where all life is treated as good, or tov? That's a great Greek, Hebrew word. I usually spend more time in the Greek. But it's a great Hebrew word because there's this inherent goodness in the created world. And it's, I think, easy to forget, but also just easy to commodify it and turn it into something we just use for ourselves rather than...
Modify is a great word, especially in our very capitalist society.
I know.
Which is not biblical at all.
No. Can I say one more thing about tov and good?
Yeah.
As someone who... So, like...
Sure.
we're talking about like creation and like animals and all that being good too, but I think it's easy for people to think they're not good, and like I know a lot of people struggle, and like this has been me for a long time, is like I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy, or whatever, or you like fail at something, or you like get a bad grade on a test, or you mess up or whatever, and you're like, I'm not good. And it's easy to like label ourselves or even label other people. It's like, I'm not good, I'm bad. And the inherent goodness is in us too. And I think sometimes people need to hear that like, hey homie, like you're good. You're created good. You are enough and whole as you are. And like God says you're good. And like I know I need to hear that sometimes.
We all need to hear that.
Yeah. Because to me, like that's really great news with this creator God who is so artistic and creative and can make life flourish anywhere, looks at you and is like, you're good. I created you good. Isn't that cool? I'm like, oh yeah.
It was a few years ago, I had a conversation about preaching with one of my aunts, and she's like, well, how's preaching going? And I was like, oh, good, but sometimes I feel like I'm just repeating myself. Like, how many different ways can I find to say God loves you and that Jesus loves you? And she was like, it needs to be said, though. Every week, someone needs to hear that. So there's a reason that you need to keep finding ways to say that.
Yeah. And I think that's true. Like, if that's going to be a thing I repeat over and over, honestly, there are way worse things, right? Because, like, it's hard. Our world constantly is telling us that we're not enough. That we need to change in order to be worthy or good, or we need to be...
Your bodies aren't good
We
enough.
need to be thin, which is bullcrap.
You're not man enough.
You don't fit into this box. You need to change and be anything other than who you are to be good. And this is God saying, no, that's bull.
You need to buy cooler clothes, or you need to strive to make more money. Or,
And God, this is so contrary. And God is just so contrary to that with this story and saying, no. You're good. You're good. You're very good. Creation is very good. Amen. Right? Like,
see, I was telling you there's hope in there.
Yeah.
Look, you just like proved my hope right, Mrs. Pessimist over in the corner.
Miracles do happen. With God, all things are possible.
Oh, thanks. We didn't have a platitude yet over this episode. So. No, I appreciate that. I'm going to cut us off, though.
That's fine.
Yeah. Thanks, Allison, for this great, delightful conversation and sharing in one of my favorite parts of scriptures when we're looking at, I always invite, I was like, well, this is sort of the lectionary Sunday if we want to do it. If you don't want to talk about the lectionary, that's fine. And she's like, oh, no, we're talking about Genesis 1. I'm like, great, beautiful. I'm so excited. Let's do it. So thanks
I love Genesis.
For joining this and for sharing that beautiful, what was the word for that literary?
Merism. That's everyone's word of the day.
Merism. Yeah.
It's new to me too, so I'm excited.
That's brilliant. You, as a biologist, of course, didn't study literature too hard.
God,
me, as an economist in finance, didn't study literature too hard. So I appreciate now a lot more about literature than I obviously ever did as a child. I hated to read, and so I'm like, as an adult for the first time, like in the last few years, like, I'm
reading for fun now.
Yeah, I'm reading for fun.
I used to only read to get the free Six Flags tickets or like free pizza.
I was like, free pizza, Six Flags? Damn,
ours was
went to a nicer school than I did.
I think it was Six Flags.
Well, there's a Six Flags near
It's
you.
really near.
There's no Six Flags in Iowa. Pizza it was.
Sorry for your lesser reward.
That's okay. I was such a slow reader that I just kind of gave up and I was like, you know what? I'll buy my own damn pizza.
That's fair. Or your parents would buy it for you.
Well, yeah. Anyways, thanks. Everyone, please look forward to the rest of the season and all of our live guests because I have more fun when the guests are live, so I think the podcast will be more fun. You can learn more about the 10-Foot Pole Podcast at 10footpolepodcast.com and find us on Facebook and Instagram at 10-Foot Pole Podcast and wherever you listen to podcasts. The 10-Foot Pole Podcast is a ministry of the Delaware Maryland Synod. To learn more, go to demdsynod.org. Take care, everyone.